My name is Cory Davis, and I'm out here from Los Angeles. Just flew in yesterday. Really excited to be here, and more than anything, I'm just very impressed and sort of overwhelmed that there is a group of people that are so interested in these topics. That I see the industry as it continues to grow and mature, and I see these opportunities that are sort of showing themselves now. They've been there for a long time, but I think there's a movement, there's a growing sort of desire to have a deeper experience with interactive media, and so I'm just really happy to be here, really excited that you're also excited about these topics, because it's not sort of the natural thing to take something that was originally created for another purpose, in terms of interactive video games, and sort of take the inherent feeling and emotion that we get naturally from those experiences and think deeper about them. What does it mean? What can it do to us? How can it affect us? And I really do believe that this is a uniquely powerful medium. This is a medium where, just by the very act of having that device sitting in someone's living room or wherever they happen to be experiencing that thing, you're able to reach into their sort of into that place where they are in a way that's not it's not like you showing up and knocking on their door and trying to tell them a message. It's actually allowing them to experience those things for themselves and to make their own judgments. And so before I start, basically, I developed a game with Jaeger Development and 2K Games called Spec Ops The Line, and I just wanted to, before I start, give credit to those individuals and those teams, because this wasn't about me. This was about a big group of people coming together to put their heart and soul on the table and try and do something new and challenging and risky. And we had successes and we had failures. But I just want to give a ton of credit to especially the development team at Jaeger in Berlin. The experience that we had together making this game, and also the fact that financially people were willing to come and back this type of project. People at 2K that really put their entire careers on the line to get this thing into into the zone where it could be sold and where it could be given to sort of the mass market gaming community. I think that's amazing, and even though we battled the entire time, and it was a very difficult and trying experience, and some of us probably did things that we'll never forgive each other for. Looking back on it now, it's a really interesting experience for me, because you sort of leave those things behind and then move on to your next project. And so this past week, I've had the chance to really sort of talk to a lot of the people that were involved with it and find out the ways that this impacted their lives, this entire process that we went through. And so a 15-minute speech is a pretty short amount of time to dig into these into this topic. Like when I started putting my outline together for things that I'd like to speak about in terms of games as an interactive and existential experience, I realized I was putting more together like an outline for a book or a documentary film. And so this will just be a small snippet of that, but I hope that the other talks here will continue to go down the paths of exploring these things. I know they will, and I hope that we have a chance to talk to each other a little bit after the meetings as well. But first of all, like I said, this is a uniquely powerful medium, and I'm really tired of sort of some of the false limitations that are surrounding it. I'm tired of people having a very limited view of what this medium is, what a video game experience can be. I'm tired of people trying to say games need to be one thing. Games are just like everything else, and just like everything else in the universe, they can be a lot of things, and they can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And as I've seen the gaming community grow, myself included, I think I always felt that there was something more there, and so I'm really happy that we're able to explore that. I've witnessed the change that sort of these types of experiences can have. Me growing up, I remember, so I'll share with you some personal experiences. Basically, I dealt with loss at a young age. And I'm not telling you that to tug at your heartstrings. I just want you to know the sort of the perspective and what led me to want to work on this sort of project. And games were always the thing where I could go and lose myself, and I could go and I could find a little bit of opportunity to express myself in a comforting and inviting environment where the consequences were different than they are in the physical world. And so basically I constantly throughout my life went back to different games. And I remember even my first experiences with my dad and playing like King's Quest on an old 8088 PC when I was 4 or 5 years old. These experiences are what sort of drove me and comforted me and allowed me to come to terms with a lot of the feelings that I had about the things that were happening in my life. And I've seen that happen not just with me, but also with gamers. I'm really, really happy about the community that's associated with the types of games that are trying to make a push in this area. Like when I look at Reddit, when I look basically all around the internet, there's people that want to talk about this. And so that's fantastic. Games have potential to affect a broad audience. So in ways that maybe certain types of kids don't really want to spend their summer reading a book. We want them to do that, of course. But if there's interactive gaming experiences that also contain a lot of that same sort of emotion and feeling, then they can have a meaningful experience with that as well. And it's like it almost happens naturally. And to me, the tech and the technology and the overall skill level of developers has improved a lot. But we don't see enough of sort of the creative push in the industry to go towards challenging and difficult and moral dilemma type of situations. So, so to me, now's the time to sort of lay the groundwork for more in-depth experiences as you see sort of technology, turning towards experiences that can really blur the lines between reality and interactivity and sort of virtual experiences. And so you see things like the Oculus Rift and other types of virtual reality devices now that are allowing people to experience these things and really sort of dive into them entirely. So for me, Spec Ops The Line was an experiment. It was an attempt to challenge the player's perceptions of war, the human condition, and its psychological impact. And so I think almost every game project is an experiment on a theory. And so some of these theories are, what can be financially viable? How can we get players to pay us more money? Another theory could be that maybe I have a theory about fun and enjoyment, about competition. And I want to prove that out with my game design and see how players react to it. But the third one that came to mind is the more emotional and experiential type of theory. Maybe I have a theory that I could affect people's feelings about war, that I could possibly allow them to experience those things like I have and change their feelings about that and overcome some of the difficult and trying psychological impact of those experiences. So, so for me, growing up, seeing games as something more, something that could impact me as a place where I could have these types of emotional experiences, it really led me to want to develop something that could express that. And I think the entire team over there in Berlin had similar experiences. And so our team in particular was a very diverse team. And so I think I realized that when I arrived. We ended up having 16 different nationalities working on the team. And each of them, I think, dealt with war and dealt with, and even games and interactivity in a different way as they were growing up. But that diversity is what drove us to challenge our own preconceptions, because what I realized was that it's not about the message that I'm trying to deliver, it's about sort of the overall message of existence and allowing people to explore that for themselves. And this really was a life-changing experience for everyone that was involved. I think it was really trying, it was really difficult. A number of us uprooted our lives and our families to move to Berlin to sort of dive into this opportunity. And I just want to share a quote by Francis Ford Coppola. about Apocalypse Now, and he said, my film is not a movie. My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam. It's what it was really like. It was crazy. There were too many of us. We had access to too much money, too much equipment, and little by little we went insane. And so our experience wasn't exactly like his. Obviously, they were out in the jungle, and the too much money part definitely wasn't my experience. But I think what he's saying is true. You can't fake that sort of emotional impact that a team can have on a gaming experience. That's something that has to come from within the hearts and the souls of the people that are actually making the content decisions on that game. And so in Berlin, for example, we were able to be surrounded by sort of the elements that allowed us to funnel into this experience. I walked past the Berlin Wall every day on my way to work. There was bullet holes in the signs that they've preserved, like the street signs and things like that. Walked past golden cobblestones that represented people that were taken to concentration camps. And so in fact, they found a World War II bomb under the studio one day. And so we had to evacuate, and basically I just remember all of us were at a beer garden and just in amazement sitting there thinking about how World War II actually affected our day as we were developing a game about the psychology and morality of war. And so that was amazing. That was something we couldn't ignore, and it definitely poured into and changed what we developed. Also, there was a number of people on the team that just wouldn't shut up about their opinion, and that's fantastic to me. To me, having an air of inclusiveness and a respect for those people that are around you and their own personal experiences allows them to express them, allows them to realize that there's more there than what they probably thought of originally. And you have to be willing to accept that you might be wrong. And that's something that's sort of hit me in the face a million times, is that as I go in, I try to dive in and make a very sort of specific goal come to life. A lot of times along the way, just because of how we were trying to achieve that, we learned something else. We learned something new. And when we were willing to say, okay, what we thought was true might not be true, that's when we really found the heart and the soul of that experience. When we were willing to say our own preconceptions and our own sort of philosophies need to be challenged, and even our thoughts about history, that's when we found the really interesting things that allowed us to develop the parts of the game that I'm the most proud of. So I wanted to, I'm not sure, so I've got about 10 minutes. I wanted to dive a little bit into sort of some tips for luring the player into an existential experience, things that I learned along the way. And so this is a really strange thing for me to do because I'm always the guy going like, don't try to quantify existential experiences. Don't put my stuff in a pie chart. You know, get me out of the task list, get me out of the spreadsheet, because I've just seen those things sort of suck the soul out of so many projects. And you know, you might end up with the marketing coming out correctly in the end, but you really feel a hollowness within when the team doesn't sort of disconnect themselves from the process and really think about themselves and about the goals that they had that really needed to come from a place within them. So the first thing I would say is, and we talked a little bit about this already, ask tough questions. This is something that is not easy to do, especially when you're trying to create an experience that needs to be marketed to the mass market. We're dealing with a publisher and things like that. You have to put things on the table that make you feel uncomfortable and that will definitely cause the player to think and to evaluate their own worldview. The only way to do that is to dive into things that might even sort of, you might take those things home with you. They can affect your life. The next thing I would say is don't preach or give out easy answers. Life isn't actually full of easy answers at all. And so our game shouldn't be either. If we do those things, I think they should be subverted. They should be used to sort of lure the player into a place where you can say, now look at this other side of this thing. Look at this other perspective. Ambiguity really is the key. To me, if you can find things that are truly ambiguous for the player to be interacting with, but still have meaning, it can be symbolic meaning, can be narrative meaning, can be moral in terms of its meaning. But if you can find true ambiguity, you found the place where players are going to all of a sudden stop and think. And so there was an experience that I had when we were, shopping the game around to different like journalists and things like that as we were preparing to it. And we're playing with the journalist, and we get to a decision scene where basically you're asked to make a decision between the life and death of two different characters. And neither of them has a very positive sort of association. And the journalist turned and looked at me and goes, what do I do? And I was really confused. Well, it's really, we asked you to shoot someone. And he said, no, what do you want me to do? And that's when I realized that we've been so trained to try and figure out what the game designer wants us to do, what wants us to know, wants us to believe, that we don't think about ourselves. And so when you find that really, truly ambiguous situation, it can cause people to sort of reset and go, wait a minute, something more is happening here. And so that was really exciting for me. Pacing. It's so important. You can't move past, you can't move through development just creating the experience as you sort of laid it out at the beginning. You're going to have to closely monitor the emotional experience of the player as he goes throughout. We had some failures with this on Spec Ops The Line. If you notice, the first hour and 20 minutes of the game, we dealt with a lot of shooting and stuff. And so some people turned off the game before they had a really impactful experience. And so that's a lesson that I'll take with me as I try and learn to, latch the player on to the deeper meaning of those things as soon as possible. You do have to lure them into it, though. If you drop it on them at the beginning, it seems like it can be a very sort of shocking experience. Consistency in all things. So I always say try to avoid full realism. Like stylization, I think is a friend of ours, at least for now. To me, if there's one element in the experience that is inconsistent in terms of its rendering, in terms of the way, the quality of it, all of those things, it will take you out of the experience immediately. So I'd rather have an 8-bit style pixel art than I would have, a fully scanned celebrity actor standing there looking at me, because the rest of the world is not going to be like that. And even that actor himself is going to sort of come with its own connotation for me. And so as we create a style that's consistent and strong, and that we follow throughout the entire experience, all of a sudden you can dive into that universe and imagine that you're actually there. Interactivity. So this is where we have a sort of leg up on everyone else who's trying to create experiences in this sort of zone. And so we have to think of how we can get the player's hands dirty so that he can reflect on himself. And that's not always a really comfortable thing to do. But that feeling of agency is so important. That feeling of what would I do if I was here, or maybe I am here, and I'm not even thinking about what ifs. That feeling of agency comes from being able to make choices in a way that's I think, sort of out of the ordinary for most games. So I think specific scenes where we have to make decisions in a game like this are very important. And they don't always need a long-term payoff to be meaningful. Sometimes the decision that a player makes is about the player. And so it's not always the type of thing where we have to worry about the cost of content if we allow the player to make a decision about paying it off in a big way later on. I think the entire experience needs a payoff, but there's a number of tangible decisions that the player can make throughout the experience that allow him to embody the characters and the narrative as he moves through it. I would say that fun can be subverted pretty effectively. So if we want people to feel what it feels like to do something that maybe they wouldn't do in real life, I think allowing them to enjoy it and then showing them what they did is the way to do that. And so one example of that in Spec Ops The Line, if you had a chance to play it, was the white phosphorus scene that we put together. And in that scene, it was great when we first went into the focus test, because people were having so much fun. And Spec Ops The Line isn't a game where I would say it's the most fun game to go shoot people in. But they were really enjoying that particular scene, blowing up those soldiers. And so we put as much effort as we could into making that as fun as it could be. And then when the tables were turned, and if you know the story there, basically you find out that you've been bombing characters that you were involved with earlier, and you've killed civilians. And watching people break down as they walked into that scenario and had that reveal come to them, the contrast between them enjoying what they did and then realizing what they did was really impactful to me. I'd say experiential moments are more important than repetitive gameplay. So a lot of people argue with me about that. In fact, some of the criticism of Spec Ops The Line is about that. The repetitive part of the game isn't as fun as it could be. And that's fine to criticize that. But for me personally, the things that really come home and really sort of made the experience meaningful were not those times when I was just trying to get through the next checkpoint, but it was when I was waking up and my leg is injured and I'm having to stumble through an area where civilians are trying to get water, things like that. Those small moments, those are the things that really sort of took the experience and added a depth and a layer to it that made it much more important. I would say subtlety is really important. Games have a problem with this. We constantly want everything to be big and epic and explosions and violence and sex and all of these things. We want it to really sort of all be as expressive as it can be because that's what makes the great trailer. That's what sells the game. But for me, when you pull back that sort of desire to throw it all out on the table and you save those moments for, like I was mentioning with the pacing and the emotional impact of those moments, or even removing those moments from the game so that you don't have that sort of feeling of, I paid money and now I got lots of explosions, but I got something more. I would say the subconscious is extremely important when you think about the player and what he's experiencing. There are ways to get the player into the zone for an emotional experience that don't have anything to do with the mechanics or the direct storyline of the game. When you look around the environment, and basically you can subliminally pull the player into those experiences. If you have a chance, basically if you watch anything that Kubrick has ever made, he's doing this in almost every one of his scenes. You saw a few of the films up here, but he's getting you into the zone for an emotional experience that you're not even quite aware of yet when it happens, but it hits you in a way that couldn't have happened without that sort of preparation. I would say character evolution and legitimate character dilemmas are extremely important. So if we have characters in our game and they're important to the narrative, we have to be willing to let them evolve as they would with these experiences. We have to take them seriously. This is a cost thing, I know. It's a difficult thing to do when you've created sort of a set of animations and sounds and mechanics for your characters to perform. To take that and to break it down in some way or to change it in some way is expensive. But I've seen the emotional impact of that. I've seen the way that can become a tangible thing for players that are experiencing it. I think it's important to review review a number of the choices and experiences that the player has had at some point in the game, but not in a gamey way. Not with score or not with high fives, but in a way that shows a different perspective than the one you probably had when you were making those decisions. Writing and voice are now more important than they've ever been. We have an opportunity to have characters that really sort of express human emotion, and in order to do that, you're going to have to scrutinize the writing extremely hard. You're going to have to be willing to cut and rewrite and prepare the team for that. I don't think that this type of experience comes out of writing a script and recording it and putting it in the game. It comes out of doing that a number of times, as many times as you can afford, and being willing to say, just like I was mentioning earlier, being willing to say, no, I was wrong about that moment. We need to rewrite it and go back and try it again. To me, music and sound are sort of the hidden catalyst for all of these things. I'm a musician, but you don't have to be one in order to create an experience that uses the elements of music and sound to take you into an emotional zone. And so I've definitely seen when a project focuses on that, when it becomes one of its major goals and its investments, that becomes a tangible thing very quickly. So just a couple more things here. I think one of the things that was most important to the overall completion of the project and sort of allowing us to hit some of the goals that we had at the start was having enough time to polish at the end. And so you can't always afford to add another year to your project, or even 6 months, or even a month sometimes. So you have to look at that ahead of time. If you're diving into this zone, trying to allow the player to have an existential experience, you're going to have to polish the hell out of it. It's going to have edges that are going to have to come off, and it's going to take time. And so I would try to plan ahead as much as you can in terms of, by this time, we have to be at this point so that we have time to get it all polished. And that polish time in this zone has to be longer than what we're typically used to. Cut and cut some more. The experiences don't have to be long. It's really, really difficult to take something that we put so much effort into and then remove it from the game. It can be trying for the team. It can be really hard for everyone. But those things that stay in the game can be what ruin the entire experience. You have to be able to take a step back and look at the entire sort of emotional journey that the player is on, and be willing to pull out the parts that aren't necessary. They really can hurt. And I've made the mistake so many times of not doing that. And so that's what I would say, learn to cut even when it hurts. Last thing I would say is, in most cases, when we're talking about this type of experience, we shouldn't be thinking about the sequel. We should be willing to take our characters and destroy them if we have to. We should be willing to destroy the entire universe if we have to get the player into a zone to have these experiences. And so, like, you can imagine Apocalypse Now if Coppola was thinking about, Kurt's making a comeback at some point. That's just, it's not interesting, and it's the thing that as developers we're constantly tempted to do. We're not the only ones that are. Writers are, filmmakers are as well. But that is something that I think from the start of the project, if you're interested in touching the heart of the player, if there's going to be a sequel, it should be something you talk about once you've already done that. And just lastly, I just wanted to say that, once again, I'm really, really happy that I had the opportunity to develop Spec Ops The Line, and I had the chance to dive into these things personally and emotionally. I wish I had more time to talk about it, but I really do believe that there's something very, very important that's going on with this movement of people trying to figure out how interactivity can affect others, and how can it affect gamers. And I'm really excited to see where we go with this, and I feel like in this workshop today, we're going to learn a lot about that. And so, thanks a lot.